Hi, my name is Ben Atkinson, and welcome to Season 2 of the Functional Health Podcast. I'm trained in both biomedical science and nutrition, and I firmly believe that a holistic and functional approach to health is fundamental to our well-being. I interview some of the leading voices in nutrition and lifestyle medicine, from practitioners to professors and everyone in between. With this podcast, I will share with you their stories, their expertise, and their advice, shedding light on the industry from each of their perspectives and providing you with simple tips and tricks to help improve your health from today. This week, I'm delighted to be speaking with Oliver Barnett. Oliver is a nutritional therapist, herbalist, and is founder of the London Clinic of Nutrition. I became aware of Oliver when I was attending the Integrative Healthcare and Applied Nutrition Summit in 2018, where his clinic was presented with the Outstanding Contribution to the Community Award. In this episode, we touch upon his integrative approach to complex conditions. So, without further ado, Oliver, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, Oliver, you are now highly qualified in the area of nutrition and functional medicine. Where did your interest in this field of nutrition begin?
I think, like a lot of people, it was from Patrick Holford's Optimum Nutrition Bible. We're just randomly reading that, and then that sort of spawned an interest in it. And my wife was at the time doing a homeopathy degree as well. So I think as a sort of coming from that sort of a house of people involved in complementary medicine, that's probably the reason.
Right, okay, yeah, Patrick Holford seemed to have influenced many people coming up in this field, I think, especially because he was one of the founders of ION, I believe, the Institute of Optimum Nutrition.
Yeah. I think it seems like most people will say that that was their major influence in starting. I think some actually a lot of therapists as well, I think, have it. Their reason for starting out is because they managed to heal themselves.
Yes.
Thankfully, I was okay health-wise generally, so that wasn't the route that I'd gone down for that reason.
So what was it with nutrition and nutritional therapy that was particularly interesting to you?
It just made a lot of sense. I think originally I just did the course because I thought this is interesting. My wife was doing a course, and I thought, well, I'll just do a course as well. Why not?
Yeah.
And then I was working at the time in the property industry, and I sort of thought, well, I'll just do it, just for extra knowledge because it's interesting. And then many years, after many years of sort of juggling two jobs, I decided, take the plunge and do it full time, and make more of a career out of it and ditch working in property. And I think that working in this industry has been much more fulfilling. Maybe not necessarily financially fulfilling, but certainly more fulfilling in helping people transform their lives.
Fantastic. And do you have a particular specialism in this industry?
I didn't when I started, but I think now we as a clinic we've built up a reputation. The sort of often I sort of coin the term treating the untreatable. So treating sort of complex chronic illness, unexplained illness, Lyme disease, mold illness, severe complications of digestive disorders, autoimmune disease, that sort of stuff. We do get your sort of run-of-the-mill patients, but I think a lot of the work we do is dealing with quite complex cases.
And is that because you were searching for those kind of complex cases, or did those cases just end up coming to you when nothing else worked?
I think it's about careful what you wish for, because I used to get a lot of like digestive cases and hormones and Hashimoto's and thyroid stuff, and I was getting really bored, and I thought, I was thinking, well, not another digestive case. Well, I asked the universe for something a bit more interesting, and then it's careful what you wish for. And then relatively soon later, we just started to get a lot of these really complex cases. And I think it was, there was sort of a conference I went to about 5 years ago, organised by Rio Health on Lyme disease, and I think I've been treating people for Lyme, but not actually knowing it was Lyme.
Right.
And then this conference sort of highlighted to me this was a real problem, and then then I thought, oh right, well, I've been treating these people happily for Lyme, but I never really gave it a name, and I think a lot of these people have Lyme, and then started to get more aware of it, and improving my knowledge, and sort of, and we've now had quite a reputation for among some of those complex illnesses, treating people for Lyme disease.
So, for the listeners, what is Lyme disease? Because I was unaware that it was prevalent within the UK. I know it's quite prevalent in the US.
Lyme disease is a caused by a bacterial infection, and the bacteria is called Borrelia burgdorferi. Lyme is after the area in Connecticut, in Lyme in America, where it was discovered, and burgdorferi is named after the man that discovered the bacteria. And you tend to get it traditionally through like tick bites, but you can get it from mosquitoes and sandflies and spider bites, and also through sexual transmission as well, although more research is needed there. But no, it is prevalent in the UK, and it's pretty prevalent throughout the UK, whether you're in Richmond Park or in parks in Surrey, or obviously Scotland is quite a hotbed for Lyme as well, for ticks. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it is a real problem, and it seems to me that every week people are coming into the clinic from all different locations and saying they've had tick bites and not feeling so well. And obviously some people get it abroad as well. And even mosquito bites. Sometimes patients get tons of mosquito bites. I've had it from people being to Thailand, lots of mosquito bites. They come back and they've got it through that source.
Because I suppose it's one of those things where, do you think it's potentially underdiagnosed as an illness?
Yeah, very much so. The current methodology for diagnosing on the NHS isn't great. And the testing, there isn't really a perfect test for it at all. So it's really a clinical diagnosis and taking a very good case history with the patient that really helps separate whether you believe the patient has Lyme or not.
So when people come to you, how is your clinic different to others that are out there? I think
that a lot of practitioners operate in isolation, working on their own, maybe a little bit, maybe some admin support or something. But generally, people don't work as teams. And I think that can be quite isolating. And I think with the clinic about 3 years ago, I decided that I was killing myself seeing 50 patients a week. And I thought, I've got to do something different. Otherwise, I'm going to end up like one of my patients. And I started working with a nice young lady called Nishta. And it was just the two of us. And then my wife was helping us out with all the admin and what have you. And then sort of here we are sort of 3 years later now with 20 of us and working sort of collaboratively as a team. So that's quite unique in the UK, maybe in Europe as well, as a sort of an integrated collaborative functional medicine clinic, which combines, naturopaths and herbalists and nutritionists, and people with radionics and homeopathy as well, and a decent admin support team dealing with admin inquiries and all the testing and what have you. And I think on busy months, we might have, sort of 300-400 patients going through the clinic.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, it's grown in 3 years quite a lot.
Massively. I think from 3 to 20 is quite a substantial growth in this industry, anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned radionics there, but I'm unfamiliar with the term.
Radionics is a pre-runner to bioresonance. So before bioresonance existed, people used to use radionics, and the particular homeopath in our team uses radionics because it tends to offer better accuracy than bioresonance.
Right. Okay.
So it's quite an old school method of doing it. It's quite labor intensive. And so he has actually now got a really good bioresonance machine, which he sort of combines that with. So he does a mixture of the two.
When people come to see you most often, do you find like a lot of the conditions that you see are lifestyle related, or is it these kind of complex conditions where it is through, as you said before, in the example of Lyme disease, a tick bite or another factor?
Well, I think lifestyle is within all of this, because you can get bitten by a tick and it could have no effect whatsoever. And often people get bitten 20 years ago and then has no effect for 20 years, and then they have a stressful event, a series of stressful events, or one chronic stress, or a series of stresses, and then they find their immune system has lost immune tolerance, and something occurred, maybe like a viral load or parasitic load or a bacterial load, which the body was happily dealing with, then becomes something the body can't deal with. They lose immune tolerance, and then that's when they really start struggling. So I think everything. Lifestyle is everything to do with health.
Right. Okay. You're gonna have to excuse my ignorance here when I ask this question. With glandular fever and things of that nature, is that the case there? Because it seems like a lot of students seem to get this at periods of very high stress.
Yeah,
And that's Epstein-Barr primarily, I think, is the virus involved.
Yeah, and also it's often called the kissing disease, isn't it? So you
Yes.
it can be passed, well, effectively by kissing, and in a very social contact. But again, Epstein-Barr virus infection, some people, it's pretty ubiquitous, EBV, and it's we've all come into contact with it at some point in our life. And again, I think when we're at a low, like you say, when you've got had a lot of stress or a series of stresses, it can then take hold. And I think if you tested most people, especially if you just did a simple IgG antibodies test, you probably find the vast majority of people would test positive for IgG antibodies, so they've had exposure at some point. I think I remember reading recently. I think it's 90% of us are infected with EBV.
Wow. Okay, I did not know that statistic. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why I read that the other day, but I mean, that doesn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
It may actually have been in this book called An Epidemic of Absence, which is a book about autoimmunity and allergy, and I think it was in that book.
That is one I'll have to note down and put in the show notes.
Yeah, one of the best books I've ever read. That is.
Okay, that's a real testament to it then. Great.
Yeah, that's incredible, life-changing book.
You've written about detoxification before, and I've seen an article by you. What does detox mean to you, and why do you think this is important?
I think that what it means to me is that you're just supporting the body's natural processes of elimination, and what's referred to as biotransformation, which is turning sort of nasty little substances into stuff that can be easily excreted, via the bowels or the kidneys or the liver. And normally the body does this pretty well. But, if you've got, say, a genetic predisposition and you've got quite a high level of a particular toxin, and, there's thousands of toxins out there. We're exposed to more and more every year. And sometimes there comes a tipping point and the body just can't deal with all these things. And, so it's a bit like you take the metaphor of a bathtub and a drain, and the liquid coming into the bathtub, maybe the toxins, and the drain is your detox capacity. If you've got tons of stuff coming into the bathtub and your drain is not working very well, you're going to get an overflowing bathtub. And I think a lot of people get to the situation where they get an overflowing of toxins and the body can't handle them. And I think it starts with the bowels. If you're not having, 2 to 3 bowel movements a day, that for me is effectively a sign that you're constipated. And if you're constipated, you're not gonna get rid of toxins as well as someone who isn't constipated. And then if you're finding you're not going to the loo enough, then the next organ of elimination in the sort of the chain is going to bear the brunt, and that will often be the liver.
Yes.
And the most classical sort of toxins that we see in the clinic would be things like heavy metals, mycotoxins from mold, environmental toxins like PCBs, or things like BPA in plastics, or things like or environmental toxins such as organophosphates, and the sort of toxins you get in things like varnishes and paints and that sort of stuff. And glyphosate. Yeah, you should always mention glyphosate, I guess, because that obviously would impair intestinal permeability, and that again is another toxin that can affect people.
Do you find that the accumulation of these toxins end up producing clinical symptoms when you test for them, and the removal of them seems to reduce symptoms, or is it just something which adds to the underlying condition?
No, I think it's really significant. I mean, if you said to me, from a physical medicine perspective, what are the underlying causes in people's health? If I had to pick 2 things, I would say infections and toxins. Right. And I find that not every toxin you can test for, because there's thousands, but most of the most prominent ones you can test for in some way, shape, or form if you want to. And then you can retest for them afterwards. So after you follow a detox protocol, you can then retest for them. A, the patient's feeling better, but B, have you got all the toxins out of the body that you're trying to eliminate?
Yes.
And quite often the answer is yes. The patient feels better, the levels are at a reasonable level, and your work is done. And then the patient then has to have a maintenance program of some sort. But I think we can't live in a bubble. and it's only going to get worse. You know, I think something like hundreds of thousands of more toxins we're exposed to than we were sort of 70 years ago.
Yes.
And, you know, we can't avoid everything, but, you know, it's about damage limitation. You know, it's things like, you know, reducing EMF exposure, you know, using safe materials in your dental work, living in a house that you think that is pretty dry and doesn't have water damage, trying to ensure that, you know, you're not exposed to too much plastics and you use glass or stainless steel containers, and trying to not to use tins where you can avoid it, and use cartons where you can.
And is that because the BPA in tins and the kind of xenobiotics and phytoestrogens and plastics which cause the problem there?
Yeah, exactly, and especially coconut milk, because BPA binds to fat quite well. So I tend to use the Grace brand from Amazon because it's probably the best tasting one. There's no additives in it, and it's in a carton. Oh, and it's quite cheap as well. So that's always a key one to be avoiding, tins with coconut milk.
And is that Tetra Pak? Is that the?
I think so. I don't know.
Okay.
No, I don't know. I don't know which particular brand does the packaging for them, but it's like a carton.
Yes. Okay.
But Grace is brilliant. The best thing for me, you know, is that it's the best tasting one on the market. It's like super, super thick. So I think those are the more common toxins that, you know, that it's useful to avoid. I mean, I'm a big fan of infrared sauna.
Yes.
And I use a company called Get Fit in the showroom's based in Radlett. It's probably the only full body infrared device on the market. They make them like cocoons or it looks a bit like a sleeping bag or a mat. And I find that invaluable. You know, I think A, for working with patients, but really B, as an insurance policy for your health. You know, I've got one at home, and, you know, I think that every home should have one, really, because it's just a way of helping improving, putting light back into your body. You know, it's effectively a form of light therapy. We don't spend enough time in the light. You're putting photons back into the body. And improving, you know, cellular repair, mitochondrial function, and detoxification. So that's quite a useful technique. Being a sort of traditional naturopath, you know, I like things like coffee enemas as well, which is obviously the mainstay of the Gerson therapy.
Yes.
Coffee enemas can be really useful when you look at sort of like patient surveys of people with complex chronic illness. The coffee enemas always seem to be in the top 5 of the things that they like the most. Well, in terms of they like the most in the sense that they felt better, you know, after having them.
Yes, it seems to be quite a controversial topic now, but I know that the coffee enema used to be in the Merck Manual, which is the traditional medical textbook.
Right. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, I think in the US, was the originally put me onto this. Where did you come across it yourself? Did you find it in the literature where this seemed to be beneficial, or is there any literature to support its use?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, Gerson obviously did have his case. He had a lot of cases that, you know, and he did with his own research. I mean, obviously, I was taught it when I did naturopathy, and I've done it on myself, obviously, to experience the benefits. And, you know, I've done quite a lot of cleanses doing with coffee enemas. And it's quite useful, and I get my patients to use it. So, and my patients seem to really benefit. I always, you know, often say do it once or twice a week, and often they love it so much they do it 5 times a week.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay. Quite a plethora of things that we can leverage in order to remove these harmful substances and also kind of prevent exposure. What's your take on, for example, using cosmetics, deodorants, things like that? Are those things that we need to be mindful of as well?
Yeah, I mean, people often say that, you know, only put in your body what you put in your mouth.
Yes.
And there's some reasonable ranges out there. You know, like things like Green People or Faith in Nature are quite nice natural brands, or Neal's Yard. Most stuff on the high street, you know, your Cliniques and your, you know, sort of main brands like that, and Lancome and places like that, obviously you've got a whole heap of ingredients, which really you don't really want a whole heap of ingredients that look like they've come out of a chemistry set. And, you know, if you go onto an environmental working group's website, you can look at all these ingredients and find out what the risk factor is for them.
Yes.
There's also a book called The Chemical Maze. I had that from years ago. I don't know if anyone's people still buying that one, but that was one of the first books I bought on the subject. It was called The Chemical Maze, and it lists them all in there.
Are there any lifestyle or supplementation protocols that seem to benefit the health of the majority of your patients? I suppose the one that springs to mind is in terms of a supplement is vitamin D, as deficiency is so common in westernized populations. But what are your thoughts?
I think it's rife throughout the world. I mean, we have patients in California and Dubai and Qatar, very hot places, and they're just as deficient, probably more deficient than people in the UK, which is probably a surprise to your audience. But the reason why is because these people in these very hot countries, they cover up all the time, or they wear sunscreen, and they go from one air-conditioned building to another. So I tend to find I've actually seen some of the biggest deficiencies in people from California and like Saudi Arabia and places like that. It's really quite surprising. But the UK again is most everybody is vitamin D deficient unless they are supplementing. That's just the long and short of it. And I really like patients to really be at around 125 for optimal levels of vitamin D. But I know myself, because I've got gene mutations in the VDR genes personally, and unless I take 6 to 7,000 IUs a day, I can't get above 100.
Right.
So I need to take about 6 or 7,000 a day. And I often skip days and forget. So I haven't taken any vitamin D for about a week now. So I think probably tonight I'll probably take a mega dose of like 50,000 IUs. And I'll just, some people do that. Some people just take a mega dose every week.
Yes, well, you can get prescribed that. It's not unusual. It's a fat-soluble vitamin that will stay in your blood for a long time. So, yeah.
I find that, if you're coming down with the lurgy, then I find mega dosing vitamin D and vitamin A can be really useful. So, I'll do like 100,000 IUs of vitamin A and like 50,000 or more, or maybe even 100,000 IUs of both as a single dose can be really effective.
One thing that I've seen on your website is the use of IV intravenous supplementation of various different nutrients. Now, not many people are aware that this even exists, let alone any potential benefits that it may have. Why do you use IV supplementation and what are its effects? I know there's multiple vitamins there.
The weird thing is, I didn't even know this till I met the company that produced them, but actually it's really popular in Asia.
Right.
In Thailand and Vietnam and China and places like that. Apparently there's lots of places, you just walk down high streets and stuff, and there's places doing IVs, which I found really surprising, to be honest. But the guy who runs the company, he's actually based out in the Far East all the time anyway. That's where he bases himself. Obviously the company's in the UK, but the owner's based out in the Far East. And
yes,
yeah, I mean we start using them because we find that intravenously, your absorption is much higher than, say, supplementally. And then some patients don't really tolerate supplements very well. Mm-hmm. So we find those patients really benefit from having the IVs. But there's things like when you're doing metal detoxes, like high dose vitamin C and high dose glutathione is very useful. And glutathione tends to be very poorly absorbed orally and is much better absorbed in an IV. And also, a big part of, say, like Linus Pauling's work was, high dose vitamin C therapy for cancer. So, vitamin C can knock out any pathogen out there. It can treat any virus, it can treat any form of pathogen, and can get rid of any toxin. And it's very very good for the immune system. So some people will do things like having 75 to 100 grams of vitamin C at a time intravenously, and it can work really well for high pathogen loads, but also for cancer. We have some patients come in for 25 grams at a time just for high viral loads. So there's a lot of use in these infusions.
Yes, because I understand, like, especially with vitamin C, even though it's water soluble, you get to a certain level of bowel tolerance, and that can be, for some people, up to like 1,000 milligrams, which is only a gram. So getting the IV, I suppose you bypass all those processes which may be limiting its absorption.
Yeah, you don't really get loose bowels in IVs. I mean, some people's bowel tolerance might be 2 grams of vitamin C orally, some might be 15 grams, but you're never going to get, most people are around about 10 grams, but you're never really going to be able to get to sort of comfortably, for most people, 10, 15, 20, 30 grams, unless you have it as an IV. You could do it liposomally, but that'd be very expensive buying, like Altrin C, you get 30 in a pack and it's like 50 quid. That'd be your 30 grams of vitamin C, but an expensive way of doing it.
Yeah, I suppose it's the same with glutathione as well. I know there's liposomal glutathione you can buy, although I don't know the absorption rates in comparison to taking it IV.
Yeah, I mean, the companies that obviously that produce it, they say, I mean, some companies, one company out there that claims it's more even better than the IV, which I don't really necessarily agree with. And I guess for experience, I've had people on the liposomal stuff, which I do use with patients to top it up. But I've often found that people don't get the benefits from the liposomal one that they do with the IV.
So when would you use glutathione apart from detox? And for listeners, the glutathione is the master antioxidant in the body. It's responsible for numerous different processes.
Well, I mean, if you look at specific conditions, I mean, it's quite well known in, like, especially things like Parkinson's. Parkinson's has really beneficial effects for people with Parkinson's, in terms of reducing their symptoms and the neurological symptoms. The neurological symptoms can be reduced quite nicely, actually, with a lot of conditions, things like motor neuron disease, MS as well. It can be very useful as well for people with MS. Again, but I often do it in heavy metal toxicity programs. I'm using high dose vitamin C and glutathione, and I find the patients that do the IVs when we retest them, get far quicker lowered heavy metal levels than those that don't do the IVs.
Extremely interesting. So you find
it can be double the time, and I find you can half the time if you have an intense, say 10 IVs, like 10 IVs over say a couple of months, yeah. And then you go, say, once a month thereafter for the rest of the year, I find those patients can get very high mercury levels down in half the time than those that don't do the IVs. It'll take the other people 2 years, but it'll take them 1 year.
And assuming this is a very safe way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there are other treatments out there in IV you can have. We could do them if we wanted to, but we don't, because I just think they're not as safe. You've got options like DMPS in IV or DMSA in IV, but I think that
chelation therapies, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, we use oral DMSA with patients, and we use a very low dose orally with patients, but I haven't really gone with IV EDTA or DMSA or DMPS with patients. So having looked at what other people are doing around the world, I just feel that it's at its safest doing it the way that we do it. I quite like Joe Pizzorno's oral program, which is 300 milligrams of oral DMSA every third day, and that's pretty sort of safe and quite. I've never had a patient ever have a reaction to that sort of level of dosing.
Joe Pizzorno, he's the naturopath in the US, isn't he, Dr. Joe Pizzorno?
Yeah, he wrote with Michael Murray. He wrote the text of functional medicine, and he's written a lot of books. And he founded Bastyr University, so he's a bit of a legend.
And moving very smoothly, I think, into a particular area that I know you're interested in, but it's also quite controversial in some circles, and that is the area of Hellmanns therapy. Can you explain to listeners what this is or what conditions it's appropriate for?
Sure. I was aware of Hellmanns therapy about 5 years ago, and Hellmanns are a type of worm. And some of the people I was following in the States were using them for treating patients with autoimmune disease, autism, and allergy. And those guys were Dr. Sidney Baker, who's one of the sort of forefathers of functional medicine.
Yes.
And William Parker at Duke University, Dr. Parker. And also more recently, Dr. Yehuda Schoenfeld, who's considered one of the leading experts in the world on autoimmunity, based out of Israel. And so I've been tracking the research and these guys for quite a while, and it's only sort of recently I just thought to myself, do you know what, I've got to get cracking with this. I've got to start using it on patients myself, because these guys are getting great results, and I really need to do it. And I also read the book by Moises Velasquez. I've forgotten his surname now, but the book's called An Epidemic of Absence, which is probably, again, I mentioned it earlier, probably one of the best books I've ever read. And that really goes into all the detail and the research as to why it's beneficial. But a lot of it comes from the hygiene hypothesis and the old friends sort of theory that we made ourselves super clean. We've got rid of all these bugs, made ourselves too clean. And as a result, when you look at the research, when we made ourselves super clean and we got rid of all the worms, we found there's been an epidemic of allergenic disease like hay fever and things like that, but also autoimmune conditions such as Hashimoto's or MS or alopecia totalis or areata. So what we found is the Sidney Baker refers to the treatment as being making a lot of sense because it's has no risk or very limited risk.
Mm-hmm.
B, if you've got more than 50% chance of being a benefit to the patient, it's good. C, it's relatively inexpensive, and there's very limited side effects, if any. So in that sense, it makes a lot of sense to at least try it with these patients. And you have to continually sort of take the Hellmanns every sort of 2 to 3 weeks. You can't see them, so they're microscopic, but you get it in like a saline solution, and you add it with like a fatty medium like coconut milk or dairy milk if you drink dairy, because it's absorbed better that way.
Yes.
And you tend to start with maybe a colony, you know, about 30 of the, what does Sidney Baker calls them, little dudes. So you start with about 30 of the little dudes, and then you just work up from there. And then kids and very sensitive people will use lower doses. And you wait about 3 weeks, and you just keep, you know, upping the dose if you need to, and maintaining the number based on your symptoms. Dr. Weinstock, the American gastroenterologist, he was one of the first to start using them, and he had a lot of research in inflammatory bowel disease with it, and very, very good success. And then more recently, it's had a lot of very good success in a lot of conditions, specifically autism and alopecia. And then also you've got very good effects with MS as well. Even in the UK, Nottingham University has been running a couple of trials using Hellmanns as a means of treating people with MS.
Yes.
And I think they're looking for more candidates at the moment for their latest Hellmanns trial, actually. And also, I was speaking to another nutritionist the other day, and I was put onto her by someone else who told me you need to speak to her because she's been dealing with Hellmanns. And I spoke to her, and she had MS herself, and she's cured herself with Hellmann therapy from MS. So, you know, and also if people want more information, there's a humongous Wikipedia online, and it's called Helminths Therapy Wiki. And there's so much information, you could be spending like a week reading it if you wanted to. But yeah, there's an awful lot of information. But there's different Hellmanns as well. You know, there's different types of species that people are using, but I'm using the ones that William Parker, Yehuda Schoenfeld, and Dr. Baker are using in America, and they're called HDCs. Now, don't ask me to tell you the Latin what the HDC stands for off the top of my head, because I can't. But you can look it up online, because I can never pronounce it. But it's there's a lab in the UK that produces them, and they are based in Lancaster or Lancashire. And the company, the website, the clues in the web address, it's biomerestoration.com. And the idea is you're, you know, restoring the microbiome. And they're a really nice company based up, you know, Northern England. And it not interestingly, most of their business comes from the States. So there's not too many people use them in the UK. And I've only started using them the last month or so. So I haven't really got any data at the moment, but I'm very positive about their use and the results I anticipate us getting.
It's an extremely exciting area, and certainly something which I've never heard of prior to this conversation. I know we spoke about it a little bit beforehand, but is this, what was it called? The Helminths Wiki? Or
Helminths Therapy Wiki.
Helminths Therapy Wiki. Okay, I will put that in the show notes so the listeners can have a look.
Yeah.
And certainly I will be as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the HDCs that we're using. I mean, in America and other places, it's the pig whipworm that the porcine whipworm. More people are using, but Sidney Baker and the people in the UK seem to say that actually with the HDCs you're getting far less side effects and any issues with them, and they're much more easy to use for people. So so I'm quite glad we've got access to this laboratory in the UK, and we can use those with patients that need them.
So what's the proposed mechanism of action? Because I know Dr. Alessio Fasano has done a lot of work on gut hyperpermeability, which we always talk about on this podcast, and it seems to precede a lot of autoimmune conditions, or certainly associated with them. Does the Hellmann therapy work via this mechanism, by healing the gut, as it were? or is it?
No, I don't think so. I think it's more as it's modulating the immune system, and you know, the clue of the name of the UK lab, biome restoration. It's in that, the clues in that title, and
Yes.
I think it's effectively, because the MRHA is classed as a nutritional supplement. This Hellmanns at the moment by the MRHA, believe it or not. So I would just view it as a bit like a probiotic, but one that actually resides in the gut and stays there. Well, I say stay there. You've got to keep topping it up every few weeks. It's not like a parasite. A parasite just occupies the body and burrows into all the different places in the body and in all different, in some cases, the brain and stuff. With these, they don't really, they form a colony, but you've got to keep topping the colony up.
Okay.
So they're not. It's not like a pathogenic parasite like, I don't know, Giardia or something like that. It's a beneficial worm, in the same way that you have beneficial bacteria in a probiotic.
I think it's very good that you've made that distinction there, because I think a lot of people who may be familiar with Hellmanns as they relate to pinworms might be thinking, why would I put a parasite inside my body? And do we have to get rid of it after we ingest it?
Yeah, I mean, there is some anecdotal comments by the very rare circumstances, which I've heard from Sydney Baker. People can get some unwanted symptoms with the Hellmanns, but in those cases, if people do get any symptoms they don't like, it's a very simple 3-day antibiotic course to get rid of your colony, which obviously means if you are enjoying having the Hellmann therapy, you can't really take antibiotics during that period, because if you do, you've got to start again and get a new colony.
This can be used for multiple different types of conditions, as you've just illustrated. Are there any other, for lack of a better word, unusual techniques which you use which seem to be efficacious in the treatment of illness?
Oh, unusual. We've had to be, as a clinic, we've had to be quite tenacious. And because most people we come to the clinic have been to so many places before they've been to us. Some of those places, they haven't really grabbed the bull by the horns and used a very good integrative functional approach. And some places have. And, some people come in saying they can't tolerate any supplements and can't tolerate this. So we've had to stock various different ranges and stuff that generally no one else has got in the UK to try and treat these very sensitive patients. But there's nothing, we just use a very eclectic series of different remedies or techniques. Often we'll refer out for certain techniques, and we'll use things like family constellation therapy, which many people may not have heard of, or we'll use something called the journey technique, and again we'll refer out to that. So we will refer out for sort of different disciplines that we don't have within the clinic.
Yes.
But other than that, there's nothing that I would think that's too esoteric that we do that the audience may not have heard of, other than what we've mentioned.
How do you see medicine evolving as new research emerges in this area?
Yeah, I think it's a really good time for integrated and natural medicine. I think people are getting a little bit fed up with the current model, which is an acute care model trying to treat chronic health problems, and people want a different sort of model. So I think it's a good period to be in this area. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of a fan of Star Trek you are, but
or Star Wars.
Okay, but in Star Trek, they've got them already, these medical tricorders, but obviously not to the extent that they had them in Star Trek. But I genuinely believe in our lifetime, people, you'll be scanned with a medical tricorder, and that tricorder device will tell you what your gene mutations are, what nutrients you're deficient in, what bugs you've got, what pathogens, what infections you've got, what toxins you've got. And then obviously, and who knows, maybe that device will even treat you as well. I suspect that's available within our lifetime. Obviously, in Star Trek, it's done with what they call a hypospray. Whether we'll have something similar to a hypospray, I don't know. But